Good day, everyone. We are the first group to report and discuss Unit 1, Chapter 4 Language, Communication, Culture, and Power in Context. So, I am Hannah May Maluluyon, and I will be discussing the introduction and definition of human communication. Next will be Rena Angelimante for the components of human communication, Alberta Ocon for the communication properties. After that, Christine Tagsip will explain the language, culture, and verbal communication. And lastly, Princess Vilando will discuss the characteristics of an effective intercultural communication in second. To begin with the discussion, I will discuss to you the introduction and definition of human communication. Introduction. The relationship between culture and communication is not straightforward, but rather it is varied, personal, and combined. It is important to understand the process of human communication to be an effective intercultural communicator. It is also vital to know the impact of cultural dimensions and power in communicative events that take place within a particular environment. Introduction to human communication shows how central effective communication is to shared meaning making, identity construction and maintenance, and responsible interaction with the world. So, definitions of human communication. According to Theo Hyman, communication means the process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. Just like culture, human communication is hard to define, and scholars have given it different definitions over time. So here are some of the most common elements associated with the communication and the definition that describes the element that is emphasized. First is process. According to Carey, communication is a symbolic process whereby reality is produced, maintained, repaired, and transformed. What Carey means by reality here is a more substantial domain of existence, layered upon a real world of objects, the events, and processes that we deserve. Second is dynamic. According to Martin and Nakayama, communication is dynamic. This means that communication is not a single event but is ongoing, so that communicators are at once both senders and receivers. Communication is not fixed and is changing constantly. Third is interactive or transactive. Communication is the process by which individuals try to exchange ideas, feelings, symbols, meanings to create commonality. Communication is a two-way process as both the sender and receiver are involved in alternate position for sending a message and giving feedback. Fourth is symbolic. According to Burleson and Steiner, communication is the transmission of information, ideas, emotion, skills, etc. by the use of symbols, words, pictures, figures, graphs, etc. Some people are not able to use speech to communicate, so they may need to use symbols to express their thoughts or feelings to let others understand the message they want to communicate. Fifth is the intentional and unintentional. So according to Tubbs, unintentional messages are not purposeful but may be transmitted by action as well as by words. Words are used to communicate which are intentional. Sometimes these words or messages communicate something other than what is intended, or they have an unintentional meaning depending on the person receiving it. 6 is situated and contextual. Communication is dependent on the context in which it occurs. Communication is contextual when both parties involved know that the current conversation is about. They are aware of the relation, environmental, and cultural context of the exchange of messages. Seventh is pervasive. Communication is the process through which participants create and share information with one another as they move toward reaching mutual understanding. Communication is involved in every aspect of daily life, from birth to death. It is universal. Communication is a pervasive activity which encompasses all facets of our lives. Our life is spent mostly in communicating with each other. Next is power infused. Communication is the mechanism by which power is exerted. Communication is a powerful component of leadership. Communicating is a must in good times or bad times. Your communication should clarify objectives, expectations, and progress. Last is cultural. According to Sorrells, communication is a process of utilizing cultural resources. Cultural communication is the use of communication to carry out the activities and commitments of their particular communities through the use of symbolic resources. And that would be all for the introduction and definition of human communication. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I'm Rina Angeli A. Mante from BPA 2B. So today we'll be discussing the components of human communication. The transfer of message from a sender to a recipient in an intelligible manner is the finest definition of communication. So let's get started. First, I will show you the figure of communication process. So to understand that figure, let's start to familiarize the definition of it. First is sender. It's a person who is sending a message through verbally or non-verbally. Example is Henry asks Johnny about the right pathway to Jeju Island. So, Henry is the sender while Johnny is the receiver. Encoding is the process of putting an idea or message into a set of symbols. The encoding also occurs when the sender begins to formulate the message. Next is message. A message is a process that allows the sender and the receiver to form an communication to each other. Example for that is text messages, email, and appointment reminders. Channel is a type of media through which a message is sent and received. There are three types of channel. Verbal communication is the most used channel in day-to-day activities. Example is when you talk to someone physically. Next is written communication. It's a widely used channel of communication and it's more formal because you take time and process your message. Lastly is non-verbal communication. It's the easiest way to communicate because unlike written communication, you don't need to write the thought you want to send to your receiver. You only need to use your physical appearance or actions. Noise interference refers to anything that interferes with the communication process between the sender and the receiver. Example is background sounds, hearing impairment, unfamiliar jargon, and professional terminology. Receiver is the person who is receiving the message that is being sent. Let's use the same example. So Henry asked Johnny about the right pathway to Jeju Island. So Johnny is the receiver because he's the one who received the message coming from the sender, which is Henry. Decoding is simply turning communication into thoughts. Example, I'm sleepy. Do you want to sleep? So next is the receiver response. It's the function of the receiver to the message. Feedback is a response from a receiver to a message. It's like the reaction to what you've said to them. Lastly, it's context. It's the overall environment in the communication process. Example, political, physical, and psychological. So we already know the definitions of human communication. Let's go back to our figure. So as you can see in this picture, that's the flow of the communication process. It always starts to the sender, and the sender encoding his or her thoughts to formulate to a message, and after that channel, it is where the message is sent to receiver. And also in channel we encounter some barrier, which is the noise and the feedback. Sometimes the sender and the receiver may experience a misunderstanding along in the conversation because it's where the interference occur. Example, environment noise, where the sender and the receiver talking. After channel, it's receiver. Receiver accept the sender message, so it's the sender turn to decode, and after the receiver decoding his or her thoughts, then the receiver responds to the sender. That's for today's video. I hope you learn how the components of human nature works. That's it, and have a good day.
Hi, good day. I am Alberta Ocon from BPA2-B. So in this video, I am going to tackle about the communication properties. So we all know that communication means transferring thoughts, information, emotion, and ideas through gesture, voice, symbols, signs, and expression from one person to another. So to better understand communication and its implications, there are 9 communication properties. Property 1 is the communication is a process. It involves several components such as the sender of the communication, the actual message being sent, the encoding of the message, and the receiver and the decoding of the message. So property 1 involves an interrelated, interdependent group of elements working together to achieve a desired outcome or goal. It is a series of action steps taken in order to successfully communicate. For example, the sender could deliver the message by speaking to the receiver face to face. In this case, the receiver receives the message. Then the receiver will process the message according to the communication channel the sender uses. So, okay, let's proceed to the property 2, which is the communication is a dynamic. It is characterized by energy or action. It is always developing and never passive or static. In intercultural interactions, elements in the communication process are also interdependent, variable and dynamic, as well as being irreversible. Intercultural communication is time-bound and flexible. For example, the ability to hear the words someone else is saying is only one small part of dynamic communication that involves the ability to read facial expressions, gestures, tone of voice, and body posture at the same time as listening to the what person has to say. Active participation means that people are consciously directing their messages to someone else. Thus, the communication is transactive because individuals both send and receive messages. So, the interaction between two or more people is a fundamental dimension of communication that work through ideas in their head or out loud. For example, classroom instruction is an example of interactive communication, wherein feedback from receivers influences the transmission of messages by sender. Next is property 4, which is the communication is symbolic. Symbolic communication refers to communication that involves a shared message between the sender and the receiver. For example, sign language, picture communication systems, and tactile communication systems. Speech, by the way, is also symbolic. Each gesture, vocal sound, bodily movement has meaning, and meaning itself is symbolic. Symbolic of a reality that is, in a sense, greater than communication. Property 5. Communication is both intentional and unintentional. Intentional communication is a situation in which two or more people consciously engage in interaction with a specific purpose in mind. For example, if Albie says to Christian, "Would you like to go to the basketball game tonight?" And he replies, "Sure, what time should we leave?" So in the example given, the intentional communication has occurred and they'll soon head off to the event together. Unintentional communication may also be taking place. For example, Christian may believe that Albie is asking him to go to the game because she is romantically interested in him, when in fact, she just wants to go with him as a friend. What makes communication intentional? Something that is done with intention or on purpose. Intentional communication can be called conscious communication. This implies that we are speaking with awareness of our purpose and its effect on others. And then what makes communication unintentional? Those are not purposeful but may be by actions as well as by words. These are messages that were not intended to be sent or were not intended for the individual who received it. Oftentimes, these are messages that are conveyed in nonverbal communication. So, property 6. Communication is situated and contextual. Situational context describes the reason why something is occurring and the appropriate behavior and actions associated with the situation. So, situational is for pertaining to a particular situation, while contextual is of pertaining to or depending on the context of information relating to the situation or location in which the information was found. An example of context of situation could take place in a shop. The field could be the price of certain item. The tenor would be a slight difference in the shop assistant part towards the customer because of a potential sale. Then the mode would be that of spoken inquiry, such as question, answer, and response. And then let's proceed to property 7, which is communication as pervasive. A pervasive communication, distributed presence of identity in a pervasive communication. The availability of a user is determined by the set of devices available in his surroundings. This means that anytime you are perceived by another person, you are communicating messages about yourself and your emotions, even though they may be below your level of awareness. So, communication can shine a spotlight on problems, making them easier to see and offering a stage to popularize solutions, although not always of use. Power influences the communication process. Communication is power, and like all power, how you use it matters. When people from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds interact, they do not share an equal power status. As Kubota 2012 explains, actual intercultural interactions are largely influenced by where one is positional in the power hierarchy in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, age, language, physical ableness, sexual identity, and other social categories. And then lastly is property 9, communication as cultural. Culture shapes communication. Through enculturation, the process of primary language and cultural socialization, we learn how to communicate in ways that are deemed appropriate in our culture. The verbal and nonverbal symbols we use to communicate with our in-group members are strongly influenced by our linguistic and cultural socialization. The way people communicate is the way they live. Indeed, cultural communication pertains to the use of language and other communicative means to carry out the activities and commitments of their particular communities in and through the use of symbolic resources. That's all, thank you, and I hope you've learned something from the discussion. Goodbye, God bless.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Christine Itagsip, and I'm here to discuss the language, culture, and communication style. As many interculturalists believe that our preferred modes of communication are impacted by where we came from, our background culture, our origin and language, our heritage and religion, our family, our friends, and our education.
So indeed, enculturation affected each of us.
So, let's discuss the differences in speech and communication style and how they could affect intercultural interactions. So first is the style of speech. Linguistic style is a speaking pattern.
One speech style is made up of choices regarding a wide range of linguistic style.
So for example, I came from Bohol and I'm personally a Boholana. So we use the word ija-ija, aho-aho, but it doesn't mean we have that kind of attitude. We just simply change the letter Y into J and the letter K into H. So the word iya-iya, ako-ako, will sound like ija-ija, aho-aho. So that is our speaking pattern as a Boholanos. So next is the Communication Accommodation Theory, or the CET. So the keyword here is adjustment. So it elaborates the human tendency to adjust their behaviors while interacting. The factors that can lead to CAT are adjustments which can be through verbal communication or through gestures. There are two types of accommodation process explained in this theory, the convergence and the divergence. So let's tackle first the convergence. So the keyword here is to adopt. So I'll just give you an example. So I'm Bisaya and stayed in Manila, so I tend to adopt their communication characteristics by speaking Tagalog or Filipino language in order to reduce the social distance. So the second one is the divergence. It's all about contradicts the method of adoption. So I'll just give you also an example for this. So I and my friend are talking on Tagalog or Filipino language, and when I'm pissed of her, I switch my dialect into Bisaya, which she can't understand. So this emphasizes the differences among the close relations with each other. So, in other words, the act of convergence bringing the interactants together, while the divergence has the opposite effect. So next is the speech style as audience design. So this is all about the individual speaker have a choice. So according to Bell 2007, we do not speak in constantly the same way. We're shifting the way we talk in different ways, and on different occasions, we talk different way. And I do agree with him. The style shifting and code switching is quite relevant on this discussion, so we will also tackle them. So in style shifting, it's all about changing the style. So it means it is the use of more than one style of speech during the course of single conversation or written text, while the code switching is changing between different languages. So the next is the communication style, and it's all about a pattern of verbal and non-verbal behavior. So we as individual has this verbal and non-verbal patterns that can influence how we communicate and may not match our evolving thoughts and emotions. And as a result, what we say doesn't always align with what we meant, as we give the others the wrong impression of what we want to communicate. So next is the high context versus low context communication. So Hall and anthropologists categorize the cultures into two broad types, the high context and the low context. So according to him, it is closely correlated with the cultural dimension of individualism and the collectivism. So we will tackle also the individualism and the collectivism. The collectivist culture has this characteristic: community, collaboration, shared interest, harmony, tradition, the public good, and maintaining faith, while the individualistic culture has placed more emphasis on personal rights and responsibility, privacy, voicing one's opinion, freedom, innovation, and self-expression. So in high context culture, the keyword here is communicated through indirect and non-verbal. So in this culture, indirect communication, implicit verbal messages, subtitle non-verbal behaviors such as poses, silences, gestures, and many more. So, high context culture usually found in collectivist-oriented nations. So, high context communication occurs in cultures that communication through the context of social interactions. And this type of culture usually found in collectivist-oriented nations such as Japan, China, Mexico, and many more. While the low context culture, the keyword here is direct, specific, and literal expression. So in indirect communication, the speaker's intentions and views are made clear by the use of clear, direct speech and forthright tone of voice. So in this culture, the primary responsibility for ensuring that listener correctly receive and interpret verbal messages rests on the speaker. This culture usually found in individualistic-oriented nations such as Denmark, Germany, Sweden, and many more. So any interactions between these two context communicator can lead to mistrust and anxiety until the individual develop more understanding about these two contexts. So last but not the least is the limitation of communication style typologies. So the keyword here is people may also favor one communication style, and I'll give you an example for this. So we as a student, we use more direct communication if we are in school or if we approach a teacher. But if we're talking to a friend, we are using more indirect communication. So that's all for my discussion. Princess Vilando will discuss the next topic.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. My name is Princess Valando from Group 1, and right now we're going to tackle about the characteristics of an effective intercultural communicator in second language situations. But for us to understand more about this topic, let us first know what is intercultural communication. So intercultural communication from the word enter, which means involving two or more. Intercultural communication kay nag-refer ni siya sa communication between people from two different culture. Like for example, I am a call center agent and I am working in an international company. We all know that international company, the customers there are American people or people that is living outside the Philippines. So we can say that there is an intercultural communication that is happening or that is taking place since I am a Cebuano and I am talking to an American person and we have different linguistic as well as cultures. The next one is second language. We all know that second language is not our native language or our first language. Kay ang first language mo ni siya atong unang nakatunan or ang atong nadakan. Example is I am a Cebuano, so I can say that my first language is Bisaya. And since I also know how to speak basic English, I considered English as my second language. So, since we already know what is intercultural communication and what is second language, let us go ahead and find out what are the characteristics of an effective intercultural communicator. The following are some suggestions to become an effective intercultural communicator. First and foremost, learn about different cultures and values. So this is very important because it gives meaningful interaction to a person that you are talking to. And by learning different cultures and values, you are building respect and empathy for other people. At the same time, if we would be able to learn different cultures, mas makasabot ta why they are acting that way, where they are coming from, and makabaw sad ta sa pwede og dili pwede buhaton sa ilahang culture. Like for example, in New York culture kay eating or drinking coffee while walking is acceptable, but in other countries like France and Japan, they treat eating and walking as two different activities and it is not acceptable for them. There are many ways to learn different cultures and values. One of it is by traveling. Kay lahi ra man gyud basta ikaw na maka-experience sa lain-laing cultures or tradition. But if you lack money, there is a lot of resources like reading books or watching movies or documentaries. The second one is be sensitive to the cultural beliefs, values, and gender differences. So this is also really important because by being sensitive to the different cultural beliefs, kay maka-avoid sa tag-conflict ba? Like for example, we are talking to a Muslim person and we are talking about our favorite food. Nya, mo na ko nga akong favorite food kay lechon. So Muslim people they don't eat meat or pork because when they eat meat or pork, it is considered as a sin to them. So by doing that, it is like I am being insensitive or I am disrespecting the person that I am talking to. Mao nang importante to be sensitive to the differences of other people or other culture for the communication to be effective. Number 3, recognize your personal style of communication. So there are 5 different types of communication styles. The first one is assertive, second aggressive, third passive, fourth passive aggressive, and fifth is manipulative. So for example, I am an aggressive communicator, like bati kaayo akong tone of delivery, ganahan ko nga ako ray paminawon sa akong kastorya or kanang mura kog nasuko, and I do not value the other person's feelings, it will definitely create conflict between me and the person that I am talking to. So it is really important to switch your style of communicating because the way you deliver it will affect the person you're speaking to. Thus, it is important to be an assertive communicator. For those who don't know, assertive communication is believed to be the most effective style of communication because assertive communicators kay ma-express gihapon nila ilahang honest thoughts in a polite and respectful way that considers other people's opinions and feelings. The fourth one is be aware of your rate of speech. If you speak too fast, basig dili maabsorb sa listener ang information nga imong gistorya. Talking fast can cause misunderstanding the full message. Moneng, it is also essential to speak slowly and clearly kay mas dako siyag chance nga the other person will understand you. Ang rate of speech kay naay impact on how the person that you are talking to perceive you and your message. So dapat mo pause ka if necessary para magaan nimo ang imong kastorya og time para ma-absorb ang message. Number 5 is practice mindfulness. Being truthful and authentic speaker kay importante siya for mindful speaking. Kay this will help to build trust and maka-encourage sa imong kastorya to do the same. Also, we really need to choose appropriate words or correct words in speaking. And we also need to think twice before kanang speaking. Kung kani ba atong istorya is kanang dili ba siya mag-cause og negative impact sa tao nga atong kaistorya. And by doing this, even if we have, or even if you and the person that you're talking to have differences, in terms of culture and language, but despite of your differences, respect and acceptance of each other's culture is still there. Number 6 is to avoid using idioms. It is really important to avoid using idioms in the middle of a conversation to avoid misunderstanding and confusion. For example, you are saying an idiomatic expression and wala kasabot ang imong kaistorya ato. Nya mao siya mangutana nimo kay mahalok siya i-judge nya ikaw nagpadayon gihapon sa imong gistorya. Dili na effective inyuhang communication kay wala naman mo nagkasinabot sa usag-usa. That is why it is very important to be direct to the point and be precise with your words. Also, avoid using sarcasm or inappropriate jokes, most especially if seryoso inyong gistoryahan to avoid conflict. Number 7, always double check any assumption. We must be aware about the cultural differences to avoid bias. Like for example, in India, they eat food with their bare hands. Magkinamot ra sila mangaon. It is because it is normal for them and it is part of their culture. But a lot of people have a terrible assumption nga hugaw siya nga buhaton, and it is not acceptable for other culture. But before making assumption, we must know first and understand the reason behind it. Based on research, Indian people believes that eating with your bare hands improve digestions and preventions of diabetes signs. And at the same time, we can also avoid stereotyping against different cultures. Thus, it allows us to learn and grow from other people's cultures and experiences. So to conclude, we need to understand that life isn't just all about accepting each other's similarities, but also respecting differences. Ultimately, have fun with learning and communicating. These are just some tips and tricks to get you started on the journey of effective intercultural communication. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have learned something from my discussion. Bye for now.